On this episode of International Reporters Roundtable, parents' rights, public schools back in session, and with it, increasing sex education. Schools keeping secrets, turning kids against parents. If they object, they're labeled terrorists, their custody threatened. When did the state become the authority over kids? Do parents have rights once children enter the classroom? Guests Alex Newman, Darlene Sanchez, and Tom Neumark join us to discuss parents' rights and how far the state plans to go instructing children. Welcome to International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Stephania Cox. Our conversations bring together journalists and experts from around the world. They help us uncover hidden information and details of conflicts, alliances, and connections in a deep dive discussion. This week, parents' rights. With public school back in session, we find ourselves asking, what rights do parents actually have? And the 2021 Department of Justice started targeting parents for questioning the school boards about communist education. And they labeled those parents as domestic terrorists. Are children being taught or indoctrinated? Now, with increasing sex education and transgender protections, parents are worried their children are being abused, violated, groomed. There are cases of rape, trafficking, of kids being pushed into irreversible gender-altering surgeries during developmental years, all without parental consent or even knowledge. For so long, we've assumed that the state has our best interests at heart as citizens, that public education has remained largely unchanged, except for lowering standards. But schools are rapidly evolving. The focus is shifting from academics to social reform. The California Assembly just passed a bill granting judges authority to remove child custody from parents for refusing to affirm their kids' gender identity. And the United Nations has been pushing for explicit sex education all the way down to kindergarten. Who has rights over your child once they enter school? What are the origins of state education? When and where did it begin? And why are parents relinquishing their rights to their own children's well-being? Are they being intimidated? How far is too far? Is this state-sanctioned kidnapping? Our guest today will help us unravel this dark history and shed light on what can be done about it. Time to meet our panel. Our guests today are Alex Newman, an award-winning journalist, educator, speaker, and consultant who puts his faith first in everything. Educated abroad, he speaks several languages, and his work has taken him around the globe. He's written for a wide array of publications in the U.S. and internationally, including the Epoch Times. Throughout his career, Alex has appeared on hundreds of TV shows, hosted for millions of viewers, and interviewed current and former heads of state, members of Congress, royalty, and countless others. Alex has authored several books, including an expose of government schools called Crimes of the Educators. Alex is a return guest to International Reporters Roundtable. Welcome back, Alex. Next, we have Darlene Sanchez, a former educator who now reports for the Epoch Times from Texas. She writes on a variety of issues with a focus on Texas politics, education fraud, and the erosion of traditional values. She previously worked as an investigative reporter and covered crime, courts, and government for newspapers in Texas, Florida, and Connecticut. Her work on the Sinful Messiah series, which exposed Branch Davidians leader David Koresh, was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist for investigative reporting in the 1990s. She's been covering the damage that transgender policy has done to families, targeting kids at school, as well as the United Nations push for sexual education. And Tom Neumark, the founding president of the Frederick Classical Charter School and has been involved in education reform for more than 20 years. His school is currently ranked by the U.S. News as the 4th middle charter school and #1 elementary charter school in Maryland. He is a national top 10 finalist for the bipartisan Moonshot for Kids contest to improve education. He's trained Maryland teachers in computer science instruction, written for the Maryland Public Policy Institute, and is a regular opinion columnist for the Frederick News Post. He's also started an international grassroots movement called Unteach the Overreach, encouraging parents to take control over their children's education. Welcome. Great to have you all on our show. Alex, I'd like to start with you first. The Declaration of Educational Independence. What's the goal of this movement you're a part of, and who's it for?
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. So the Declaration of Educational Independence is, we actually just released this. It's really a declaration drawing on the wisdom of our founding fathers, drawing on the wisdom of the Western tradition, and really putting a stake in the ground and making the case that education really should not be seen as the responsibility of the civil government. It is and properly must remain the responsibility of the family government and the individual. And so over the last couple hundred years in the United States, we've really gotten confused about this issue. We've gotten to the point now where it's just commonly accepted that government should be responsible for educating children and even now adults with college and so on. We think that it's time to rethink this. We think that it's time to reframe the debate. And as an ultimate objective, we do believe we should go back to the system that made this country great in the first place, a non-governmental system of education, primarily led by families, maybe with a supplemental role for the church.
Yeah, fascinating. And also, Tom, I'd like to ask you about the work that you've been doing in this area. You've just led an international school walkout called Unteach the Overreach. Could you tell me about how that went?
Yeah, it went really well. We had folks all across the world, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., keep their kids out of school or take other actions on September 14th, yesterday. And the day before, we had a rally in Frederick County, Maryland, to kind of promote that idea that really it's parents who should be in charge of education. It shouldn't be the government. Parents' rights need to be respected.
And where a lot of this is being felt really is within the homes, within families themselves. And Darlene, you've been speaking to families all about how they've been affected by these issues. What have you found in those conversations?
Well, I think parents are extremely concerned, since the pandemic, and they got a glimpse into what was happening in the classroom, during online classes. They've become very concerned about what's being taught to their children. And, as we've seen in Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, these parents have started to push back against the state trying to take control, basically, of their children. They've had enough.
And absolutely, I'm sure this is being felt in many different ways across the nation. For yourself, Alex, you've said that schools are on fire, that it's time to get the children out. What is it that makes you have such an absolute stance on this?
Well, I would actually say it's even worse than fire. Fire is just the best analogy I could think of, but in reality, this is significantly worse than a fire because a fire will hurt your children physically, and that's bad enough. What we're talking about here, and we've documented this very extensively, including in the book Crimes of the Educators. I've been in this field for 10 years, did a 22-part series for the Epoch Times exposing this building up to the fire analogy. And of course, I was a teacher for 12 years. I now serve on the board of a classical Christian school. And when I say that these schools are destroying children, I mean that in the most literal sense. These kids are being destroyed mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and academically. And that's not my opinion. If you look at the federal government's own data, less than 1/3 of the victims of the government schools can even read or do math at a proficient level. This is so far beyond unacceptable. So when I say the schools are on fire, I mean, this is not a time for reform. This is not a time for, consulting your local school board and asking them for some minor changes. This is a time for grabbing your children and running out of that building as fast as your legs can carry you. The well-being of your children is at stake.
And there's so many ways that this happens, but it does come through in a systematic way, for sure, that we can point to. Darlene, you've been investigating the diversity, equity, inclusion, also CRT that's being taught in schools. What have you found in your investigations?
Well, it is widespread. There's really no place, I think, left in America that, this hasn't infiltrated. Even in red states such as Texas and Florida, you know, these states are, very conservative, and yet you have schools that are, you know, taking this into their curriculum. They're incorporating it in different areas. So it's not like it's a class that parents can say, "Hey, I don't want my kids to learn about this." It's just being basically inserted into almost every subject, even in questions that they might have on tests, for example, in college. About LGBTQ um, people who adhere to that, ideology. All of that has been basically inserted into the classroom, whether it be K through 12 or college.
And so in a way, it's difficult for parents, for sure, to spot. But being so subtle, it may also be difficult for children to even recognize it's just happening to them throughout their day, in a way. Tom, I'd like to ask you, you've started a charter school that has been ranked #1 in Maryland by U.S. News. What motivated you to start that school, and how's it going?
Yeah, so back when I was doing that in 2013, that it was really about reading and math and some of the core subjects that the schools weren't teaching well. So we wanted to teach using scientifically based reading instruction, for example. We wanted to have math books that had lots of math in them. Believe it or not, there are actually math books that don't have a lot of math in them, and the same for history and science. So we were really motivated by the academic side of the house, and that was challenging enough. But now, as the other panelists have said, we've moved on beyond that being the main issues. Now they're pushing into gender ideology taught in kindergarten is scheduled for next year in our school system, and it's already being taught in the middle school. So they're teaching disputed ideology as fact. And so, we don't think that's right. And unfortunately in Maryland, even as a charter school, you're not allowed to opt out of that. The charter schools don't have the freedom here that they have everywhere else. So that will be coming, unfortunately, to the charter school that I started as well.
So it sounds like there are challenges across the board, but there are also a lot of ways that people are trying to make change, as we've seen from all of your efforts. Such a compelling conversation. We'll have more of this when we come back after the break. Welcome back to International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Stephanie Cox. Let's get started with our next discussion on parental rights with Darlene Sanchez. I'd like to turn to you, Darlene, and find out about the United Nations plans to promote sex education for young children. What do we know about that?
Absolutely. Well, what we've discovered is that there is an international push to incorporate comprehensive sex ed into schools around the world. In the United States, we've also been hearing similar things from groups such as Planned Parenthood and teachers' unions. These sex education standards now are incorporating the idea of consent, which is something that is, very foreign, I would think, to most parents. They wouldn't imagine that sexual consent would be something that schools will be teaching their children. But that is indeed what the UN wants.
And in a way, it sounds fairly innocent, teaching consent. It's telling people that they can say no. What about it is concerning to you?
Well, if you think about it, they're trying to separate parental rights from this issue of sex in children, which brings many experts to believe that, this is all a huge push towards sexualization of children and giving them the ability to say yes to sex. So when you start pushing consent and saying, oh, you have to have consent to have sex, well, that puts that idea into a child's head that you can consent to sex. So, and of course, that removes any type of parental oversight into something like that.
And once that idea is there and once any idea is planted so young, it can be hard to change that. So it's quite concerning. And though this kind of effect on children, this happening through the schools, has been happening for quite some time. Alex, you've written about the historical progress of this through the schools. You've named 3 historical figures in particular. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah, this agenda of sexualizing children actually has its roots in Marxism. And it's actually not an ends in and of itself, it's a means to an end. So they figured out about 100 years ago that if you could start sexualizing children, planting these ideas in their mind, you could use that to break down their moral fabric, break down the moral values and the religious traditions that the parents were trying to instill in them, and get them sexually active, which of course will have a catastrophic effect on their future families, on their future lives. The research on this is very well established. And again, the reason they wanted to do it, Karl Marx was very, very clear, even in the Communist Manifesto. He said, we want all children educated by government in free public schools. He also was very, very clear about the agenda to dismantle the family. In fact, he argued that women should be held in common, that the nuclear family, the monogamous marriage was problematic. It was a bourgeois institution. And so this sexualization of children, and it is international, the UNESCO, the UN's education agency, put out the Global International Technical Guidance on Sex Education over 5 years ago. And they want 5-year-olds to learn things that I wouldn't be comfortable with a 16 or 17-year-old learning. I mean, just absolute wickedness. But again, this is about breaking down the family and breaking down moral values. Sexualizing the children is a means to that end.
What kinds of things are we looking at here that they're teaching?
Well, I don't want to get too graphic because some of this is really bad, but we're talking when these children are 5 years old, they want to start teaching them about masturbation. They want to start teaching them about sexual pleasure. They want to start teaching them about this very, very preposterous concept of gender being a social construct, being something that an individual can choose for himself or for herself. They also want to start normalizing this idea of different types of families with 2 moms or 3 dads, or 2 moms, 3 dads, and 2 cats. So this is very, very problematic. Again, it's a war on the family, and even the war on the family itself is not the end, right? It is a means to an even bigger ends, which is the overthrow of the existing social and political and economic and moral order, so that it could be replaced with a new totalitarian system, as we saw in the countries that first implemented this, like communist Hungary 100 years ago.
Right. I'd like to come back to that. That is such an important point about the potential eventual ends here. What I'd like to ask is, a lot of this comes across as information in the schools. The way it's being taught or framed is just purely information. But would you say, Tom, that this could be grooming? Or is it sexualization?
Well, for me, I just think it's inaccurate, right? So my focus has been on the gender ideology part of it. And so when they're setting policies, for example, in Frederick County Public Schools and schools all over, where they define gender identity as something that is fixed, for example. So if a child tells you at age 5 that they, feel like they're a girl, then the school just accepts that as truth and is basically largely inflexible, like it's never going to change. And the research on this, there are 12 studies on it that we cited in a policy that several of us proposed here in Frederick County, shows that for most kids, as they grow up, they become comfortable in their natal sex. And so for me, I'm coming more from a question of accuracy, and it's not really, what the schools are teaching is not really reflecting what the science shows. And most of those kids that do desist, they often become gay more often than not. So my concern is that they're confusing kids that may ultimately be same-sex attracted.
So in a way, it's denying some of the science that we already know about what kids do end up deciding that they are if they're let to their natural course. Darlene, you've reported on potential grooming in this area. What have you found?
Well, I think that there's something out there that I think that a lot of people might not know about, and it's called queer theory. Queer theory basically has its roots in gender fluidity. You hear that term a lot, and kids thinking that they can be whatever gender they want to, the flavor of the day kind of thing. That's coming from this, and this again has some Marxist roots in it. Queer theory really is about disrupting social norms. It's about destroying norms and flipping them on their head. If you think that pedophilia is bad and not something that society accepts, then queer theory would absolutely accept that. They would say, or queer theorists would say that this is the route we need to go because of, the system, the way we have it now. If you are a straight, male or a straight female, that you have the power. And so it's all about power and flipping that on its head and destroying the family.
Fascinating discussion. We're right in the middle of our deep dive on parents' rights. Thank you so much to all of our panelists right here. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Cox with International Reporters Roundtable. We're covering parents' rights. First up, with our panel discussion today, I'd like to turn to Alex and ask you about international examples of socialism in school and their outcomes.
Well, I would say the current model we have today of education is socialism defined. I mean, we have the government has seized control over the means of production, if you will, in this case, the education of children, almost completely. This is $1 trillion a year industry that has now been almost completely taken over by the government. Even some of the schools that are not officially part of the government system are still part of the government system. For example, charter schools, they're funded by government. More and more states are now moving in the direction of using tax dollars to fund private schools, which, again, this is the very essence of socialism, where the government funds, controls, and even operates the means of production for its purposes, for the collective purposes, rather than the purposes of the individual. But if you look back historically at how schools have been used by socialists, by communists, by totalitarians, it's basically a 100-year horror show. Adolf Hitler was a very, very good example of this. This is a guy who was obsessed with the idea of indoctrinating children. He repeatedly wrote and spoke about the importance of capturing the minds of the next generation. And so he actually became the first leader in world history to criminalize home education. And of course, many governments are now following in those footsteps. We saw what happened in the Soviet Union. We saw what happened in Eastern Europe. We see what's happening to this day in places like Cuba and places like Venezuela, where the government education system has completely left behind any pretense of providing an education and has become 100% an indoctrination system to indoctrinate children into the official ideology of the regime, to break down previous traditions, morals, religions, etc. It's what we saw in China during the communist takeover, and it continues to this day. It's what we saw in virtually every totalitarian system of the last 100 years. And unfortunately, totalitarians, even in this country, have understood the importance of that. In fact, the founding father of the American public school system, at least the man widely regarded as the founding father of the American public school system, John Dewey, was a self-proclaimed socialist. This is a guy who went to the Soviet Union and couldn't say enough good things about the Soviet system. That's what we're dealing with here. They just haven't gotten quite as radical, perhaps, as we saw maybe in communist China 60 or 50 years ago.
And there's so much that we can learn from looking abroad and looking through history at these communist regimes, for example, or fascist regimes. One of the aspects within communism is often the regime will turn parents and children against each other. And how do we see that kind of effect taking place within our own school system, would you say?
It is happening so clearly at this point. In fact, we were just speaking on the transgender issue. This is a perfect example of this. They're telling these kids, your parents might not be a safe space, but you can pick whatever gender you want, and we'll keep that from your parents. This is suggesting to children that they can't trust their parents. So the government then is inserting itself as the protector, as the liberator of children from their oppressive bourgeois parents. It's unbelievably dangerous. This is exactly what Adolf Hitler did. This is exactly what Chairman Mao did. This is exactly what the communists in the Soviet Union did. They try to drive a wedge between parents and children because this interrupts the transmission belt then. The culture, the values, the religious faith that's passed down from generation to generation is now being interrupted. Now parents are hostile to children. And we've seen where this ends as well. I mean, if you want to look at the end point here, look at these totalitarian systems of the past. What ends up happening after a few years of this radical indoctrination is children will literally turn their parents over to government, knowing that they will be tortured, executed, or sent to a re-education camp.
Yes.
I don't want to sound alarmist, but that's the direction we're headed right now in this country.
Indeed. Well, that is horrific and alarming. In fact, though, there are a lot of actions, as we've seen already, that people are taking to try to remedy this. Tom, we mentioned your international walkout. You've had people around the world, I assume, taking a stand on this. What have you seen in terms of the international reach?
Yeah, I would say that around the world, parents are waking up to the fact that the schools are really not acting in their best interests, especially when it comes to like keeping secrets about their child's mental health conditions, right? Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. It's on page 511 of the DSM-5, which is the sort of the manual that psychologists use. And, parents should know about that if their child is gender questioning or has concerns. Most parents, when they hear that their child has concerns, they're not doing anything bad to them. They're not kicking them out of the house or in any way being unsafe with them. They love them more. They embrace them more. They engage with them more, take more family trips. They really try to help their children, as all good parents do. And so we're seeing across the world, for instance, Canada, next week, they are going to have a 1 million-person walkout on schools because of these ideas that, really are not in the child's best interest. Parents are the
Yeah.
best protector of their children, and that's what we need to get back.
Right, but it does seem like there's a groundswell there that you're definitely plugged into. And also back within the U.S., there's the Parents' Bill of Rights, though, Darlene, as you reported on, the Freedom Caucus rejected it this year from the House of Representatives. Why do you think that was, Darlene?
I think that's kind of difficult to say. I think that you have different factions in the Republican Party. I think they're all kind of geared towards the same thing, though, of trying to get more control for parents, especially in schools. But I think the way to go about that is really what's in dispute.
All right, and I do want to turn now back to the international scene. We've got the UN, which, Alex, you've reported on extensively as well, and their Convention of the Rights of the Child. Some say that it's insidious and backwards. It sounds fairly innocent. How do you see it?
This is a major threat. Now, fortunately, the United States is not yet a signatory, although, in so many cases we see these UN bureaucrats and even bureaucrats here in the United States, even some American courts ruling as if we had already joined these international conventions, agreements, and treaties. But what this does, just to give a very clear warning here, is it establishes the government and the government's bureaucracies as the key decision makers for children. Now, there's some lip service in there to parents, but ultimately it says all decisions need to be made in the best interests of children. And of course, the best interests of children as defined by government, not as defined by parents. Now, a very quick word here. There is nobody in the world who loves a child more than his or her parents 99.99999% of the time. This is an established fact. It's been true throughout all of human history. It will be true until the very end of time. Nobody loves a child or cares more about a child and their well-being than mom and dad. And yet here you have this UN agreement purporting to set up the UN and the government as the arbiter of what is in the best interest of the child. And so we're seeing this being implemented around the world. One that I've reported on for the New American Magazine was it happened in Scotland. In Scotland, the government, citing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, said every single child who is born in Scotland is going to have a government overseer assigned to them at the moment of birth. This government overseer will oversee their development, their education, their family life for the next 18 years until they reach adulthood. So you basically have a government bureaucrat over your shoulder as a parent, as a mom or a dad, determining whether what you're doing is in the best interest of the child. It's hard to overestimate the danger of this. It's exactly the kind of ideology and philosophy that we saw in Nazi Germany, that we saw in the Soviet Union, that we saw in communist China. It's so dangerous.
And right back here in the U.S., we've got many different cultures intersecting, and we've got this pull to be more progressive from many different directions. But at the same time, there's many people holding fast to traditional culture. Darlene, as a Latina in Texas and watching over, I'm sure, observing conservative culture around you, what are you seeing in terms of that community's response to these changes?
Well, I think that the Latino population in Texas tends to be conservative. I know that there is a lot of, Hispanics that vote Democratic. However, their values are very traditional. So I think you're seeing a shift in the vote, especially amazingly right there at the border. You would think that, that would be probably the more liberal area of Texas. But those folks down there, they have seen the impact of, some of these policies. They are Christians for the most part. They love America. These are people that have, immigrated to Texas legally or long ago, and, their families have been here for generations. They are very strong proponents of family rights, of parental rights. The family is everything to them. So I think that, the Republicans trying to make headway into that population is going to be successful eventually.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear all of your thoughts on this. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have a group discussion, so stick around. Welcome back to International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Stephanie Cox, and today we're talking about parents' rights. Next up, we're going to have a group discussion with our panelists. And first up, I'd like to start with this phenomenon of children who have gone through gender transitions and now are saying that they've been given the wrong advice, the wrong medical advice, the wrong advice perhaps from leaders within their schools. What are you seeing, Tom, about this, and who do you think should pay ultimately?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we are seeing detransitioners, as they're called, more and more of them. There's actually a detransition awareness day that GenSpect runs. It's an organization that's looking for healthy alternatives to medicalizing children. And it's a real concern. We just don't have enough data. Never before in human history have we really gone down this path in such large numbers of puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones as a way of treating gender dysphoria. This is all new territory. There really is not a sufficient evidence base to make a recommendation to do that. Historically, this has been something that middle-aged males would do, and it was a very rare phenomenon. It used to be 1 in 10,000 people would get it, and almost all of them were young boys, age 7 or below. In the last 10 years, it's shifted to almost all teen and tween girls at a ratio of 2 to 1. So this demographic shift is very concerning, and I think that's why you're getting some of the desistance or some of the detransitioners coming out now, because we don't know enough to give them good medical advice, and it's very concerning.
Right. And Alex, Darlene, where does the buck stop? What do you think?
Well, I can start. I would say anybody who is mutilating children belongs in jail. I'm a parental rights absolutist, but I draw the line at chopping off body parts from your children. That should be considered a crime. This is absolutely outrageous. Even the very progressive countries of Western Europe are now putting a stop to this quackery. It's all based on pseudoscience. If you go back and read about John Mooney, the guy who first did these quack experiments suggesting that you could change the sex or the gender of a child, this was total fraud. This was absolute pseudoscience. And one of the things that's happening today, one of the reasons why this is becoming so widespread, is because the people pushing it have developed very, very advanced tactics for psychological manipulation of these children. And I'll give you a clear example. One of the things they're doing in kindergarten classrooms, first grade classrooms, second grade classrooms is they're telling these children that they have white privilege, that because their ancestors came from Europe, they are oppressors and they are by definition responsible for every bad thing that's ever happened to somebody with slightly darker skin. And the little girls say, well, I don't want to be an oppressor. I want to be nice. And they say, well, you could get into the victim class. You could become one of the oppressed if you just pick a letter, if you maybe identify as non-binary or agender or new trois spirit, whatever. And so what happens is a lot of these little girls, they are psychologically manipulated into choosing one of these identities, because then that thereby liberates them from the white guilt, the Christian privilege that they're being told they have by their teachers. This is absolutely sick. This should be considered a crime, in my opinion, and I believe these people need to be punished. The quacks doing the surgeries, the manipulators hurting our children in this way, and I believe even the parents need to be held responsible. Again, I'm a parental rights absolutist, but when it comes to hurting your children, surgically mutilating them, that's too far.
So what do people need to know, what do parents need to know to protect their children at this point in time?
You must protect them at all costs, and thinking that the school board or the principal or the teacher or the government is going to protect them for you at this point is absolute foolishness. This is true even, unfortunately, in red states and in red jurisdictions.
And this culture actually has seeped through, not just with young people right now, but it's all through the ages, even up into adulthood now. Darlene, what are you seeing in the schools about this kind of culture of blame?
Well, it was very interesting. I spoke with a doctor, a psychologist in Texas, Dr. Hopewell, and he had a very interesting take on all this. He said this is like it's like a mass hysteria almost, this transgender movement, because he said if you look back, like even far back as the Salem witch trials, you had a lot of adolescents and young people believing that there was witches everywhere surrounding them, and that became something, of course, a horrible incident in our history. And there are people who believe that history is not going to treat us in a favorable light when they look back at what people have been advocating for here, adults and doctors, saying that children can go in there and change their lop off body parts, basically, in this quest to try to change themselves, because it's almost as like, we as a society are saying we can play God. And, that doesn't work. And it's never worked. And I think that, in the future, this is going to be like when lobotomies were seen as the thing to do, like 30 years ago. And now, we look at that in horror. I think that's what's going to happen with us as a society in the future. They're going to look back on this and look at it in horror.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the things that to point out, I totally agree, is that medical science makes mistakes, right? You have lobotomies, you have the repressed memory scandal of the 1990s, the opioid crisis. These things are all related to bad science. And I think, science is built on a chain of trust, right? Starting out with individual research studies that go up higher to meta-analysis and then eventually systematic reviews. And as Alex said, all the European and Scandinavian progressive countries that have done those systematic reviews have not found in favor of the so-called affirmative care. So I think that's something that parents need to really realize. As American parents, you're getting a different recommendation or a different position of the medical societies here versus Europe, that actually had more experience with gender medicine and now has gone back to what used to be called a wait and see approach, or what for parents, to put it simply, is just let your kids grow up. Don't make rash decisions about them.
Right, and parents are really plugged into this issue, but why would you say all people in society need to know about this and care about this? I'd like to open that up to all of you.
Sure. I mean, I'm very focused on kids, but also we've seen even adults making these decisions too and regretting it. So I think that's the detransitioner story really needs to be told more. I think when people hear from those folks, adults will start paying attention too.
Yeah. And even just a few years ago, this conversation would have been completely preposterous. Nobody would have believed that we would be talking about the systematic mutilation of children under the guise of medicine. And, a very good comparison that I heard a psychiatrist make, this would be like telling a rail thin little girl who has bulimia or anorexia, who identifies as obese. This would be like telling that little girl, you really are obese, let's schedule you for liposuction. I mean, everybody would recognize that as absolutely preposterous, as horrific, as maybe criminal. And what's happening here, these are permanent, debilitating interventions. We're talking about these children who are being sterilized now for the rest of their lives. The overwhelming majority of the children who are sucked into this dishonest cult are going to eventually come to their senses, and the science supports this. Depending on whose numbers you look at, between 80 to 95% of these kids will end up completely normal, comfortable in their body if you just leave them alone. Once you sterilize them, once you start chopping off the body parts, they'll never be able to have a family. They'll never be able to fully go back. And a lot of these people, and I've spoken with many of them, they are now angry. They are heartbroken. Their entire life has now been thrown into chaos as a result of this. There's going to have to be accountability at some point. So if I was a doctor, or if I was an insurance company insuring a doctor, I would be very, very careful.
I think that's interesting.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it has to do with money too. I think that's one of the key issues here. Is this is $1 billion industry in the United States alone. And so I think that if insurance companies, it's really going to be the key here. If they get sued enough, which they are, the lawsuits are starting to mount now, but if they are sued enough, they're going to back off approving some of these procedures. So if you cut off the money flow, I think you're going to see a big decrease in these type of surgeries and hopefully an end to it, because you're right, it's permanent. You can't go back on this, and it's a travesty.
Now, we have about a minute left
Okay.
for each of you. We have about a minute left for each of you. So I'd like to hear from each of you about what you think people can do about this.
I would say the first thing to do is pull your children out of the government schools immediately. Again, going back to the fire thing, the building's on fire. Don't talk to your school board. Don't write a letter to your state representative. Get these children out now. Get them into the safe sanctuary of a good private school, a homeschool, a Christian school. Find something else. Get together with a network of parents. Whatever it costs you, whatever sacrifices you have to make will be more than worth it. And I cannot sound the alarm more urgently and more loudly than I'm doing. Get them out. There's nothing that you can do to protect them once they're in these institutions. You just have to leave.
Darlene?
I would agree with that. If you can get your child out of the public education system at this point, I would certainly do so. The other thing that parents can do is, if you do not have that option for whatever reason, you need to start talking to your children as young as kindergarten when they go to school, and start telling them, you may hear things in school that aren't what I have taught you. You may hear things that are different. You need to come and talk to me about this. You need to start warning your children. You need to start going into and actually explaining to them what they might hear. If you're sending your child off to college, it is crucial, absolutely crucial, for you to tell them that their conservative values, hopefully that's what they were brought up with, at least our traditional values, will be challenged. They will be indoctrinated in college. That first week, it's all about indoctrination. That's what these college students have told me. And if you're a Christian college student, if you are a white college student, you could be in for a very difficult time if you don't go along with this ideology.
Okay, and Tom, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you can get your kids out of public schools, that's the safest way to avoid this. If you are in a state that has a charter school that has enough freedom, maybe you can get away from it. It's even hard for charter schools, but private schools are definitely safer options because they don't have those state mandates. And then, yeah, if you're able to, once you get your kids out, then advocating for change, as I've been focusing on, because not every kid, unfortunately, does have a family whose parents are able to take the kids out. I think it's important to advocate for school choice. You have options like school vouchers and educational savings accounts. I'd love to see more states give those opportunities to more kids.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion and an important one for sure. Thank you so much, Alex Newman, Darlene Sanchez, and Tom Neumark. Really appreciate your time on the show and your work going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, to all you brave journalists out there, honoring our journalist golden rule, seek the truth and report it. Thank you. I'm Stephanie Cox, and thank you for joining us on International Reporters Roundtable. Until next time.